Hey there, let's talk about the C70 and specifically if you should be going with EF or RF lenses. It's a difficult decision to make and hopefully this video will help you guys out with that because I'm trying to figure it out as well. So what I want to do today is compare these two lenses and also use that as a way for me to figure out which system to go with. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I'm looking for in my lens system between these two and hopefully help you guys as well with your decision. So for the comparison, I'm going to be using what I use most of the time, which is a wide zoom. And I think these two lenses are a really fair comparison. So we have the EF 16-35 2.8 version 3, and we have the RF 15-35 2.8. Frankly, I think these are really close, and I think they're going to be pretty close, but we'll see. And the reason that I am doing this is because, for me, I need to figure this out, but also this is a great way for you to see the difference between these two lenses on the C70. And anyways, I'm not going to be using a Speedbooster. We'll discuss that later in the video, but these are going to be just used on the camera. I'll be using the basic Canon EF RF adapter with the EF lens. And so for the testing, I'll be shooting everything in wide DR. I'm going to shoot the stuff outside, and that way there's no bias for me in terms of color grading. I won't be adjusting contrast, saturation, anything like that. I'll probably adjust the exposure just a little bit to get them to match because it's outside and it's a little bit variable. But otherwise, they'll just be images right out of the camera. So things I want to look at, I want to obviously look at image quality, autofocus, autofocus noise, focus breathing. Image stabilization is a huge one because the RF lens has image stabilization and the EF does not. And maybe we'll get some other ones in there. So let's get on to looking at these two lenses. So here we are outside and it is a beautiful day. So first let's do a quick image quality check of both of these lenses against each other. All right, so nothing crazy with this shot here, but this is with the RF 15-35 at 20 millimeters at f7.1. And I just want to give you kind of a wide looking shot and also something that's got a good amount of dynamic range in it so you can check that out. You guys are looking at my little farm back here. Now I'll switch over to the EF 16-35. This is the EF 16-35 and all the same settings. Just want to give you a comparison. This is on the RF 15-35. Just wanted a tighter shot, a little bit more color and some contrast. So this is at 35 millimeters and we're at f4. And the EF 16-35. Now let's take a quick look at focus breathing, something that I don't concern myself with too much because I generally am not doing large manual focus pulls, but some of you guys might be interested in this, so we'll take a look. First is the RF 15-35. And now the EF 16-35. Next test is image stabilization, and this is the EF 16-35 at 35 millimeters and f8. I am using the electronic image stabilization in the camera. I'm holding the camera with both hands and against my chest, how I would normally shoot handheld. So let's see how this looks. All right, now we got the RF 15-35 with the image stabilization on in the lens and also the electronic in the body. I do not have the steadiest hands, but trying to get this close to the same shot here. All right, quick bonus test actually. Let's look at flaring real quick, and this is the RF lens. And now the EF. Let's do a little bit of an autofocus test. I know that's going to be a big question that comes up, and it's a big concern of mine. I use autofocus a lot. So for this test, we're going to start with the RF 15-35. We'll do this at 24 millimeters and f2.8. Now we're in the EF 16-35, and this is with face priority. Now we'll do the autofocus noise test, and for this I had to move inside because frankly it was too loud outside. The bugs here are very loud and all sorts of other stuff. So we're inside here. Now what I've been recording here, and usually what I have is the NG-G5 mounted right on top of the camera. I know that's not ideal for getting the best audio. You always want to get the microphone as close to the subject as possible, but frankly for me, I'm doing a lot of documentary work. It's very quick pace, and there's usually a microphone on top of my camera. So, and I'm also using autofocus a lot. So this to me is very important, and I want to try to pick up as little noise as possible from the camera. So let's give this a check here. This is the RF. And now the EF. Well, I am pleasantly surprised by the results. The EF really hung in there, and I think a lot of cases I couldn't tell the difference. So there you go. If you're looking to stick with the EF lenses, or if you already have EF lenses, it's awesome. But one thing I want to keep in mind with this comparison, which might be different with other focal lengths or zooms, is that the 16-35 2.8 Mark III came out in 2016. The RF 15-35 came out in 2019. So this isn't a very old lens, and for EF glass, I think this is one of the last, or maybe the last few produced lenses. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why it's so close. Now, for example, the 24-70 2.8 Mark II, which is the comparable to the RF 24-70, that's a much older lens, and I noticed that it has a much louder autofocus noise than the 16-35. So, you know, your mileage may vary depending on the lenses that you want to use, and I think it's worth trying out different ones. So I'll spoil it up front here. I'm going with RF lenses, but I do want to get into all the details so that you can help, you know, focus your decision. I think the big wild card here is the Canon focal reducer, the Speedbooster. I did buy it. I tried it out. I actually wound up returning it, but it's an incredible piece of equipment. The main reason was that I just don't like adapters. And I've always wanted to keep my kit as small and as simple as possible. And I just want to use like the most current gear and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, frankly, it's the image at the end of the day that matters, but that's just me. I like to have it as compact as possible. And when I use adapters on these longer, bigger lenses, they get kind of awkward, especially on the R5. So that was the big thing for me, is that I wanted RF lenses to simplify that. Now, the focal reducer, to be fair, it bolts onto the C70, and it really doesn't feel like an adapter. Like, it feels part of the camera, which is fantastic. And autofocus and all that stuff basically worked flawlessly. I was really happy with it, but I decided to go with RF. And if you'd like to learn more about speed boosters, I'll leave a couple links for videos down below that explain them really well, because I think they're really fascinating, and I think it's one thing that really can make the C70 into a very different camera. I know a lot of people overlook the C70 because of the Super 35 sensor, and when you put the speed booster on there, you can turn your EF lenses basically into a full frame camera. The other thing about the focal reducer is great is that you get the actual focal length of your lens. So the 16-35 will give you roughly a 16-35, and it kind of opens up a lot more possibilities with the C70 because that's a Super 35. So at f2.8, for example, you'll get an f2.8 in terms of depth of field, but you'll also get stop of light more than you would on a normal full frame camera. So it actually helps you in low light. So there's a lot of benefits with the speed booster. It is $600, but if you pair that with a used EF lens, you're kind of at the price of an RF lens. So I think if you're into using EF lenses and adapting and you really want that full frame look, then I would say get the speed booster and the EF if that's really what's important to you. Now for me, I shoot most of my stuff outside, and so a 2.8 on the C70 will give me, I don't know, f4, f4.2, something like that, and that's fine for me. In terms of focal length, this 15-35 will give me like a 22-ish to 52-ish lens, which again is fine for me. Now, originally I was going to be shooting myself on the C70, and so I kind of wanted focal reducer and the 16 to 35 because I really like shooting myself around 20 millimeters, and often I do like to lower the aperture below f4 if I'm doing like talking head stuff. So what I've decided though is to use the R5 for filming myself, and frankly the 15 to 35 RF on the R5 is magical. It's just awesome, and I'll still get that 2.8 that I was looking for. And I did own this lens before with my EOS R, and it also worked amazing. It was like one of my favorite combinations. That's kind of my thing about the Speedbooster, and if you should consider it. All right, image stabilization was definitely a big part of my decision, and I don't do a lot of handheld stuff, but frankly, when you need to have IS in the lens, it is really nice to have it. In a camera that doesn't have IBIS, it just has that electronic stabilization, which definitely helps. As you can see, like it does a pretty decent job with a non-stabilized lens. Having it in the lens is awesome. Autofocus was great between the two lenses, and the one thing was the autofocus noise. And it wasn't as big of a difference as I thought it was going to be in that test. I did hear a little bit of noise out of the RF, but I did shoot a video recently on the 16 to 35, the EF, and I was doing an outdoor interview and I could hear the lens focusing. So, you know, I want as quiet as possible. And I know that the 24 to 70 EF is definitely a louder lens. As I mentioned, it's an older lens. So that is definitely something else to consider. Cost is a huge factor and it can't be overlooked. The EF lenses are definitely cheaper, even brand new, but the other thing is there's so many of these out in the world that you can get crazy good deals on used ones. And so if you're buying 2, 3, 4 lenses, you can probably save enough to buy that extra lens just by going with EF over RF. The other thing right now with RF lenses being in September of 2021 is they're actually hard to get based on like chip shortages and global supplies and all that stuff. There aren't many used ones out there, and the new ones are actually pretty hard to find as well. So it's something to consider for sure. But the other thing in terms of lenses that are available out there, the RF lens lineup is not complete yet, and they're still rolling out lenses, but there's certain lenses that if you need them, they may not be available in RF. So keeping that $100 EF RF adapter is a great thing. And, for example, if you're looking for like a 24 millimeter or 35 millimeter, like high-end prime lens, it doesn't exist on RF. So you have to go with the EF lens. So those are things to consider. But for me, I'm generally using 2.8 zooms. That's kind of my go-to, and it's been working out for me. Now, in terms of the future of EF versus RF, that's a tough thing to try to figure out. But I think that all of the mirrorless cameras moving forwards will be RF. It's just what they've been doing, and I think they're really committing to that. So, looking at the R, the R6, the R5, and whatever else comes out after that, like the R3 and other things. So I think you'll be seeing more RF lenses coming out to support those cameras. But also, they put an RF lens in the C70, so the next cinema camera might have an RF too, not sure. Another thing to consider is the size of the lenses. Now, the lenses themselves are pretty similar in size, but once you put the adapter on, there is, the EF gets a lot bigger in your bag and also on the camera. It changes the way the camera handles and feels, so keep that in mind as well. There's a lot that goes into this decision, and these lenses are very expensive, so hopefully this gives you some stuff to think about. As I said, for me, I'm going with the RF, and one of the main reasons is I'm going between the C70 and the R5. But if you have other cinema cameras and you're going between this and like a C300 or C200 or C500, something like that, then EF lenses make a lot more sense. Hopefully you found this helpful, and I'm really excited to get shooting on these new RF lenses, and I'll update you more with what lenses I go with and all that kind of stuff, and maybe I'll do some other comparisons like this. We'll see. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please consider hitting subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.